Well, howdy and welcome in to Cases They'll Never Take. We're going to be running down a case that no lawyer in their right mind would probably take moving forward. And joining me is New York City attorney Adam Calvert. And today we are discussing the notorious Tiger King. Adam, you've watched the entire series, correct?
Correct.
What was your overall take? There's going to be plenty of spoilers, so, you have been warned, and just don't worry about, letting anything out of the cat out of the bag, if you will. What was your overall take of the Tiger King documentary series?
I think there were a bunch of morally questionable but very engaging personalities in that documentary.
See, I was thinking about it the other day. We're all, right now, currently, if you're listening to this, we're all still in lockdown from the quarantine. The thing that's being stripped away from people in America is their freedom. And what the Tiger King represents to me is like the weird side effect of overall ultimate freedom. It's the hairy wart on the back of Uncle Sam. Because you're so free, eventually somebody in the middle of bumfuck nowhere is going to end up with 300 and some tigers out in the wilderness with a harem of gay lovers able to do whatever it is they want. Joe Exotic is just simply... he's the runoff of true American freedom. And I loved it for that reason alone, that these people exist in the world. And finally, the technology's caught up to, there were so many cameras catching this guy and what he's up to that we all just got to enjoy it and witness the insanity. I think the main question is, do you agree with Joe Exotic being in jail right now?
Well, the thing that kind of caught me about the documentary was that last episode, especially when they talked about what they convicted him of in the trial, I think they kind of glazed over that. Even the best documentary, unless you just had footage of the entire trial, it's tough for somebody like us to say, did a jury convict him? Was it correct for them to convict him or not? And I think obviously when you have that background of a documentary as well, and you certainly gained a following, no matter what you think about Joe, by the time you get towards the end of the documentary, you're engaged into him and his personality. You can see kind of both sides of his story. When you have that sort of background, it's tough to separate that from a legal proceeding where we really don't know the details of that.
Yeah, because I guess we didn't really see what happened in the courtroom. We just kind of know the gist of what was going on in the courtroom based on at least what the documentary filmmakers provided us with. We don't necessarily know what the quote-unquote facts that were presented were in the case. Now, from what you were able to tell, what did they actually get him on?
Well, they convicted him of both the animal cruelty charges for allegedly killing some of the cats, and also for the murder for hire, attempted murder of Karen Baskin. And so he got 22 years, I believe, for all that.
Yeah, for all of that, which makes me wonder, though, I didn't look up how many years each one of the animal cruelty charges would have gotten him, because I'm sure there was more. I'm sure they were all stacked on top of each other, because I'm sure it's not just, one charge of putting a bullet in a tiger. Each one of those dead cats probably had 3 or 4 things attached to it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I would say, a rough estimate, I would say probably 15 for the attempted murder, 7 for the animal cruelty, or maybe something like that, 7 and 5, or 17 and 5, somewhere around there.
Now, from what I understand, though, that Jeff Lowe guy and the guy who was supposedly hired to pull off the murder of that bitch Carol Baskin, they didn't go to court. They didn't have to testify. They weren't witnesses in the trial.
Well, no, because they didn't convict him on that murder for hire. Just a little recap of the documentary. The sort of henchman guy who was originally going to murder Carol and had looked at the biking path and all of that on Google Maps to figure out the best place to kill her. But he was going to drive to Florida to kill her, and I guess he got all coked up and just stopped off at a strip club in Louisiana or something. I think a little ways on his trip, and then got all messed up and never went through with it. But they didn't charge him with that. So I believe after that happened, they decided to set up a sting, the FBI, and he had somebody solicit Joe to actually hire them to do it. Kind of solidified it in a second, just say documented attempts.
I guess now that you're saying it, I remember it. So let's go all the way back. So Joe Exotic said he wanted somebody to kill Carol Baskin for probably, I think the documentary's 5 years long, so for at least that 5-year period, he probably mentioned it 3 to 4 times a day that he wanted someone to kill Carol Baskin. He wanted her dead and gone. He had video of him shooting mannequins looking like Carol. By the way, going back to American Freedom, I couldn't imagine pulling the trigger of my own gun in my own house anywhere, and this guy's just willingly just blasting off 45s wherever he damn well pleases. Supposedly, from what the documentary said, yeah, the Jeff Lowe's henchman was going to get paid $3,000 because Joe didn't have $5,000. So he chickens out, supposedly, and then there was a separate sting operation to confirm that is, in fact, what Joe wanted to have happen to Carol?
Right. I mean, it wasn't just to confirm that earlier attempt. It was basically a whole new attempt that they then recorded the calls and had an informant. I believe they had somebody actually pose as the hitman, and then they had the recordings of that attempt rather than, the earlier attempt with Joe's henchman where that was not really substantiated.
But see, here's the problem I have with that, because that sounds, from what I remember, maybe I'm misremembering. I feel like I do remember what you're talking about, but did they contact him or did he contact them to try to because I guess my point would be if somebody calls you and it's like, hey, I'll kill that bitch Carol Baskins for you. You want me to do it? Mm-hmm. And you're like, yeah, sure, why not? Like, is that the same thing?
Well, no, it's not. I mean, you have to worry about entrapment, right? Now, entrapment is when the law basically puts an idea into your head and says, like, oh, you're not thinking about doing any sort of crime. They approach you and say, hey, we're going to rob this bank. You want to get in on it with us, yada, yada. That would be entrapping. But if you're actively, planning a bank robbery and you say, I need a wheelman, anybody, and then somebody in your team says, yeah, I got somebody, and it turns out to be an FBI informant, that's not entrapment. And even if that FBI informant were to say, well, hey, how about we also blow up the vault and take this extra money, it's still not entrapment because you're already actively engaged in that crime, actively trying to pursue that crime. Same thing with this. I mean, Joe was actively trying to kill her. He already tried to do it once, allegedly. All these videos online of him shooting the dummies of her. And so it wasn't the FBI who approached him about it. He, I believe, solicited I can't remember the employee's name, or the guy who worked at the gun shop, I think it was, that he knew. That guy went to the FBI, and then the FBI posed as a hitman.
Okay.
But again, the documentary, I don't think, did a very good job of explaining, especially the trial part of it. They did not do a good job explaining, or the animal charges that he was convicted of.
Now, do you think they did that on purpose to continue to make Joe a sympathetic character? I feel like they probably left it out on purpose, me personally, because they wanted you to continue to have a more positive opinion of Joe. Or, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that definitely has something to do with it. I mean, we have to accept that he was guilty of this. I mean, beyond a reasonable doubt. So the fact that all these people, I think, that have watched the documentary are now calling for Joe to be released from prison. I mean, why? Is it because he didn't ask somebody to kill Carol? Is it because he didn't kill these animals? No, because they like Joe Exotic. Because by the time you get to that 7th episode of that documentary, you're rooting for Joe, even if you find some of the things that he does strange or wrong, because he's so engaging. And I think the fact that they gloss over the legal part of it, or just the fact that he was convicted of this, I mean, it's not like they're claiming that the government made up evidence or anything like that. I mean, it seems to be that people are just calling for him to be released because we sympathize with him, because we find him enjoyable, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. No, I think it's because if he was a cold-blooded killer, he would have gone and done it himself. So I think that factors in. Okay, I'm not saying that makes him a nice guy, but it does mean that he's not specifically himself a cold-blooded killer. It's almost like he was begging, in a way, someone to just go do it for him so he could just, be released of these Carol Baskin shackles for the rest of his life. I kind of feel like he was coerced in some strange way. Like, everybody, makes their own decisions in life and da-da-da-da-da. But I really feel like Jeff Lowe and the rest of this crew, I do feel like they were pushing him to get him out of the way. That they knew that Joe was on the edge just enough that if they really kind of like, Joe, you should really pursue that kill Carol Baskins thing, huh?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that probably did happen, but it doesn't make him not guilty of
Sure. No,
of attempted
and
murder. It's the reason for it, but it doesn't take away that fact.
And I feel like they did it on purpose to get him out of the way. They wanted his property, they wanted his animals, and that's why I think they pushed and helped him to pursue that, which brings up my next question. How come no one else around him has seemed to find any legal troubles at all? If they really thought that Joe was trying to kill Carol Baskin, why didn't the guy who originally was paid to go out and kill her, why hasn't he seen any kind of charges? Why hasn't he been investigated to the gills? Why hasn't Jeff Lowe been, brought in for several questions? It just seems like these are all bad people, and Joe Exotic is the only one who had any consequences for it.
Well, I'll agree with you on this. I mean, I think that pretty much everybody in that documentary, well, all the main players, I should say, Joe, Carol, Dr.
Doc Antel.
Doc Antel.
Don't call him doctor, because he's not a doctor.
Yeah,
okay, he's just Doc.
That's fair. Him and John should probably all be in jail, or at least like moral jail. I mean, Carol probably killed her husband. I think that we all kind of took that away from it. And in fact, I saw today that a lot of tips are coming in on that since the documentary came out. So, maybe she'll get her due. I believe that Doc Antel's, one of his wives was mysteriously went missing, right? He probably killed her. He seems like he could kill somebody. I don't know. Yeah, and then the other fellow, he went to jail in Vegas, right? Because didn't have permits for the Tigers, and he had some guns or things like that.
Yeah, and I mean, and again, I feel like he did create a scheme, whether he was involved in the helping to hire someone to kill someone else or not. I do feel like he was involved in that entire scheme in order to take Joe's zoo away from him clean and clear. And so whether he made the final phone call or not, he's involved in some way. Like, in some way, he pushed a man to try to have someone killed. And if he knew that that's what was going on, aren't you complicit in some way in that crime?
I mean, it would depend on the level of his involvement. I mean, just knowing that Joe wanted to kill Carol, I mean, everybody knew that. Anybody who could watching the YouTube videos could know that. I mean, that's not a crime, right? I mean, if he knew that he had solicited somebody to do it, no. I mean, he's not under an obligation to report that. And unless he did something in furtherance of it, such as find the hitman, or something like that, then, just saying, yeah, Joe, you should do it, man. You should go ahead and get a hitman. You should kill her. That's not a crime.
Yeah, I just feel like that whoever, I think it was that fat guy that looks like Eric Cartman, that I think he's the one to try to get back into Jeff's good graces and get himself out of probably a litany of shit. Because it wasn't just the weird exotic animal he had hanging out in his like strip club lobby that got him in any kind of trouble. I'm sure there's a lot of things that guy's been dabbling in. But he has to be the one that called and said, like, hey, give me your number. I'm going to have Joe Exotic call you, and he's going to try to solicit you to go kill Carol Baskin. I just feel like those guys are all so wrapped up in the same saga. I think that might be some sane people's higher rationale for having sympathy for Joe, is that Joe is like the fall guy in a really long saga. Because in reality, whether they wanted to do it or were willing to go through with it or not, they all need Carol Baskin out of the way in order to run their facilities free and clear of PETA and the federal government.
I mean, I think that if the documentary had ended like, Joe in prison, but Carol, they also find out that she killed that one husband and she's in jail. And Antel, they got him with animal rights violations and they put all of his tigers in a zoo. And I always forget the other fellow's name's John, right? Is it John? Jeff. And Jeff, let's say that they convict him of animal rights violations and he can't build that new zoo. Whatever. If the documentary ended like that and everybody got their comeuppance, we wouldn't feel as bad for Joe, because all these people probably deserved something bad to happen to them, or for them to end up in jail for something that they did. But it's the fact that Joe is the only one that's in there.
Yeah.
That's what I think everybody has a problem with.
I think you're right. And I also do believe, and I think where some of the sympathy comes from, I think if Joe Exotic got away from that weird zoo life, that he would be. He's the type of person that you can look at and say, oh, we could totally rehabilitate that guy and bring him back into normal life. And, like, he would thrive. Because one of the things I took away from that is Joe Exotic has a hell of a work ethic. I don't know about you. I don't know how to start an exotic zoo from scratch. I don't know how to get all these employees to, like, follow my command and do my bidding on a daily basis for 18 hours a day. I don't have that ability, and apparently this guy does.
Well, you're probably not taking the drugs that he was taking. That might be why.
That's true, but even if you're high on meth and crack cocaine, like, it still takes a certain amount of dedication and work ethic to, like, pull it all off. You still have to be focused on the ultimate goal of accomplishing this mission. And you saw him with the crowds. I mean, it was comical. It was like something out of a Will Ferrell movie, but still, it was entertaining. And if I was in Oklahoma, I'd want to visit his zoo. That seemed like a good time.
I mean, I would argue that the fact that he was able to do all of that while on drugs is even more impressive, right? I mean, people will do meth or coke or whatever and talk about, I'm gonna build a zoo, and then I'm gonna have all these tigers, man. Oh my god, and lions, and I'll have all these cats, and then they wake up the next morning feeling like crap and have done nothing with that. But he's out there actually doing it.
Yeah, he's actually doing it, and that's the difference. It's not a pipe dream for him; it's the pipe reality for Joe Exotic. Now, my other question is this, though. So I think it started with Cardi B. She was the first one to ask for Joe Exotic's release, and then apparently Kim and Kanye are on the case with El Presidente, and they got a pretty good track record. They've had, I think, through Trump, they've had 20 sentences commuted at this point. So, obviously, I don't believe that the President of the United States, even Donald Trump, I don't think he's going to commute Joe Exotic's sentence. In your professional opinion, are there any legal routes that can be taken to either get a new trial for Joe Exotic or lessen the sentence in some way? Is there any kind of appeal left that he can take? Like, what could he potentially do moving forward to maybe not get out of jail tomorrow, but, like, lessen his time behind bars?
As far as getting a new trial or getting his conviction overturned, as I said, they didn't really go into the trial that much. I mean, there's always motions for that. Pretty much every criminal case, any major criminal case, there's always, appeals for a new trial for this reason or the other. The counsel was ineffective. They missed this. The government did this improperly, whatever it might be. Those things usually don't win. So I would say very little chance of that. The sentences, of course, can get reduced, or he could serve a minimum of the sentence depending on how he behaves. And other than that, unless Trump is going to do something, or I really don't see it changing.
What could the president do? Because I thought it was with the presidents, it was like, all or nothing. Like, they let you out or they don't.
Right. The president has the ability to pardon. I've never actually heard of a president commuting a sentence. I think that would be a bit unprecedented because, the presidential pardon ability is, I think, pretty extreme in our democracy, right? To give that much ability to one person to decide the fate of another, even if it's the president, directly, without any sort of check and balance on it. You could say, yes, the president can pardon, and then whatever 2/3 of the Senate has to approve or something like that.
Well, okay, well then maybe I've got the terminology wrong. What does it mean to commute a sentence?
Shorten, basically.
Okay.
A lot of times you'll say they can commute it to time served, or just cut off years or whatever it might be. I've never heard of a president doing that. I've certainly heard of pardons, and Trump has handed out a few.
Yeah, that maybe I'm just confusing the term with something else, because I know he's let like up to 20 people out of jail thanks to Kim Kardashian and Kanye West. By the way, who was your favorite character in the series, minus Joe Exotic? Because I gotta say that John Reinke guy, the guy with no legs, the Lieutenant Dan.
Oh, yeah.
That guy.
Yeah, he was interesting.
He was interesting because he was the most normal person you've ever seen. It was bizarre that he was the kind of guy that was caught up in this whole racket, because he was like a philosopher in a Dale Earnhardt uniform. It was weird. It was bizarre, like, to hear him speak on things. And the last thing I heard him say, he actually was on with David Spade doing an interview, and Spade asked him, if he had talked to Joe from jail, and he's like, you know what, I haven't, because I feel like if I talk to Joe, he's going to spill his guts and he's going to say things that are going to keep him in there longer. And I don't want to do that to him. Like, that's the most logical rationale I've ever heard for not talking to one of your best friends in the world.
Yeah. I mean, as crazy as the characters are in that documentary, that guy could look normal being what we would objectively call crazy. Like, if it just made a documentary about that guy, you'd be like, that guy's a little nutty. But next to him, he looks like, oh, he's the wise man,
No, but
he acts somewhat normally.
But I think that's what made him look kind of crazy, is that he's this really well-spoken, genuine guy, but he's wrapped up in this batshit crazy world. So, like, obviously there's something wrong with him, but the thing that's wrong with him is that his personality is wrapped up in this kookiness. It's just, I mean, maybe he just loves tigers. There are those people too, and the only way to deal with tigers is to deal with Joe Exotic. So I guess there's that little caveat. I don't know, man. That whole fucking saga is that's just bizarre. I mean, the suicide, like, dropped my jaw for the full 30 seconds they killed the audio on that thing. That was weird and intense.
Yeah, that was kind of weird to say. Mm-hmm.
That was intense, man. The other question, the legal question I have for you is, having a cult legal in America? Like, just generally speaking, like, I mean, is it something that you're allowed to admit, or is it something that you just have to, like, tongue in cheek kind of like wink at? I mean, can you openly admit that you're running a cult as long as you're not doing anything to harm the people involved?
Well, that's actually a good question. I would say this. I mean, I don't think that any sort of legality of, because there have certainly been plenty of instances, throughout American history of cults that have been broken up by the government, Waco and, things of that nature. I don't think it depends on the terminology. It's not like the government is going in there because, you guys were all getting together, doing all these crazy religious things, or these crazy whatever practices might be. They're not illegal, but it's weird. Oh, well, now you're doing them and you're calling yourself a cult? Okay, now you're under arrest. No, it's not going to work like that. I mean, it has to be the activities themselves, whatever it is they're doing. Are they stockpiling illegal weapons? Are they, I don't know, putting people into sex trafficking or drugging them or things like that? I mean, that would be the illegal activity. The fact that you might call yourself a cult versus, a social club, that distinction is not going to matter.
Doc Antle seemed to get mad when they mentioned it was a cult. And then when they cut right back to Joe Exotic, he's like, yeah, I guess you could call it a cult. Yeah, I guess that kind of is what it is. Like, he was just kind of like, yeah, these people live here. I really don't pay them. and they love it, but they're free to leave whenever they want. I just provide them a life that they seem to enjoy. That was another fascinating caveat of this whole thing, is that Doc Antle is obviously running what I would call, like, a traditional cult. Yes, they can leave, but where would they go?
Right.
Joe seemed to have been running like a runaway shelter for drug addicts and weirdos. And then Carol, she didn't require them to stay on her facility, so that's how she got away with it. But I would say Doc Antle was obviously running a cult. And
yes, with recruiting young, attractive women, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So, to summarize the whole show from a legal perspective, like, what laws do you think were broken? What laws do you think were definitely being stretched? And who should go to jail, in your opinion, and who's just kind of like on the fringe of staying free?
All right, so the jury convicted Joe of those charges, so I'm going to say that was correct. Other than, I mean, a lot of these true crime documentary series dive deep into, this witness said this, but then, they changed their story, and these later DNA tests showed this, that was wrong initially, et cetera, et cetera. And they dive into all those sort of things. But I don't feel like this documentary did it. I mean, it didn't even try to say that Joe didn't kill those cats or didn't try to hire that guy to kill Carol. It was more just an emotional appeal. So I'm going to say legally Joe is guilty. I think Carol probably killed her husband, but, I need to see some evidence of that. That's just a gut feeling.
Hold on. Well, let me pause you on that because I do want to address that. So, was it legal for her to be able to go in and change the, like, I don't know what you would call that, the will? We'll just call it the will. Was it legal for her to go in and be able to, kind of change the parameters of that document, saying like dead or lost forever?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this: wills will vary state by state as far as what you need to do to make it proper. You could write something down on a piece of paper and sign it right now and say, I'm changing my will to give all my money to so-and-so and disinherit so-and-so. And that, might be valid in one state if you have witnesses, and other ones you might have to file it, or et cetera. So that's all state to state. I don't know. I will say that generally speaking, you interpret a contract, a will, any sort of legal document based off of what it says. And if it says dead or missing, and he's missing, then that's how you interpret it, as weird as it might be. I mean, now that is certainly evidence of that could be used, and let's say they uncover some other sort of evidence that she murdered her husband. They could certainly introduce that change into that trial. But on its face, on itself, yeah, I would assume it's valid, or else somebody, I think, would have challenged that.
Okay, and so I'm assuming she was never brought up on charges of the disappearance or death of Don Lewis, so is that why they're able to now go back this many years later and reinvestigate it, or is it just because it was never a closed case?
So you're thinking of double jeopardy here. In order for that to happen, you have to actually be charged with the crime and get to a certain point in the trial to where, quote, jeopardy attaches. But in any event, she was never charged with it. So there's always statute of limitations on crimes, but, murder, that's generally a longer one. You can usually no statute of limitations or a very, very long one on that.
Okay, fair enough. All right, continue.
All right, so, what other people? Doc Intel, probably some sex trafficking involved, I would think. I'm sure everybody is guilty of some sort of animal rights violations, or at least should be if those laws aren't in place. And who else are we missing? Jeff, I'm sure he's probably into drugs or something like that. Just, again, another gut feeling.
All right, and then finally, who do you think is the next person to go to trial, or do you think there is a trial?
The fact that all these tips are coming in about Carol, now the documentary's been released, I'd say she's got a good shot, although it probably might take a little longer for that whole process to play out. I feel like Jeff is probably being investigated by somebody right now, and he'll probably get convicted of some sort of tax scheme related to the new park or the new zoo that he's opening. Yeah, I'm sure he's cooking the books there somewhere, and he'll get nabbed for that.
Yeah, I kind of tend to agree with you. And it might not even be related to Tiger King at all whatsoever, but he just seems like a dirty son of a bitch. That is a con man if I've ever seen one. That's what fascinated me about that character, is just how kind of just rooted in evil he really is and was. And he had no real money. He just had that. Where Joe had like that light-sided, like, sunshine and rainbows kind of magnetism about him, to where he was able to draw people in. Jeff Lowe had that dark cloud lightning bolt style of doing it. He had no real money. Yeah. He just talked other people into giving him their money in order to move forward on whatever it is he wanted to do, and somehow he was able to accomplish all those things. And as they always say, you can't take it with you. So when Jeff Lowe dies, he'll die broke while experiencing multiple orgasms in some Vegas strip club.
He can only hope, right?
Yes, he can. And it'll probably be with that nanny. That son of a bitch. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap up the Tiger King cases they'll never take. Is there anybody in that show above anybody else that you'd be willing to represent?
Oh God, no! I don't do criminal law, because then you have to interact with criminals. So
fair enough, and that pretty much nixes anybody that was available in that documentary. All right, thank you so much, Adam, and we will chat again soon.
All right, thank you.